Hello and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Tyg Foley. I'm the Managing Director of a company called Cyber Engineers. We're a cybersecurity company and one of the big services we offer, actually one of the main services we offer, is cyber awareness campaigns. So we decided to put together this webinar just to explain to people looking at this area, looking at awareness and what's important, to maybe give you some ingredients that we think are key when you're putting together an awareness campaign. So if I can move on, I'd like to introduce my two friends who are going to help us out with the webinar today. The first person I'll introduce is my friend Tom Sherry, who is Managing Director of Sherry People Development, that was formed first back in 2006. Tom has done many years in this industry in the behaviour change area. And he delivers executive training courses and leadership programs for some of Ireland's largest companies over the last lot of years. And he brings a very interesting insight into the psychology behind behaviour change programs. So we hope what he can add in today is going to give you another thing that can help you be successful in your awareness campaigns. And now to totally contrast that, my other friend I've invited along today is Donal O'D, who is an ad man. He spent many years as the creative director for Owens DDB, one of Ireland's largest advertising agencies. He's worked on some very interesting campaigns, some you might recognise from the screen here beside me. But what Donal is going to talk to us about, what do ad chaps think about this? What do they think of when they're trying to get their message across? And in the end, I suppose, when you think about it, they're trying to convince people to purchase something or behave in a different way. So their insight, I think, is very interesting and really helps us and to add into what we're going to do today and to add that extra spice into the ingredients of a successful awareness campaign. So that's introductions done. So let's move on to the next section, which is the actual content itself. And we're going to talk about the 4 topics we want to cover today. So the 4 topics, just introduce. You don't need to write these down because we're going to cover them again later. But there's 4 main topics. One is we're going to cover optimism bias, which I referred to earlier. And Tom is going to go through that with you and explain where it comes from and what it's all about. Then we're going to hand over to Donal, who's going to talk about ad campaigns and the men in ad campaigns and how they think and how they put together their campaigns and how that thinking can help us with our awareness campaigns also. We'll move then back to Tom to talk about something very simple, but again we forget sometimes, is repetition, and then repetition. And it's very important, and Tom has kind of a sort of background, a psychological insight into that as to why it's so important in delivering lasting behavioural change for ourselves and for the people who come in our programs. And then the last one, unfortunately, is back to me, and I'm going to talk to you again, but at the end, I'm a big believer in face-to-face presentations, face-to-face classroom type training. It's the oldest type of training on the planet. People did it word of mouth down the years and passed down ideas, and they got it from father to son, mother to daughter, etc. And that's what we want to talk about. It's a really passionate thing for me. I think it's so important that we include that as an ingredient. Talk to people. Seems strange to even mention that in a campaign, but talk to people. It's very important. So I'm going to kick over here now to Tom and introduce the first of the 4 subjects, which is optimism bias. So I'll hand it over to you now, Tom.
Okay, thanks for that, Tyg. So before I talk about optimism bias, having worked in the area of people development for the last 25 years, I'm a great advocate of positivity and having a positive mental attitude. Because if we see the glass being half full rather than half empty, it helps for our own health and well-being. And also if we've positive expectations about what's going to happen, we're going to be better at our job, let's face it. That said, with my behavioural change hat on, we need to look at the whole area of optimism bias. And by the way, research says that 80% of us have this optimism bias. And what we mean by it is that we overestimate the good things that are going to happen to us to the exclusion of the bad things that might happen. And because of that, we don't take the necessary precautions to stop these bad things happening. So, for example, we all know on smoking packs we have "sure smoking kills." But that doesn't stop a lot of us continuing to smoke, because what we think well, maybe it kills, but it's not going to kill me. Or if you look at dangerous road signs on the, dangerous bend sign on the road, you might think, well, look, I'm a good driver. I'll just keep driving as I always do. It's not going to impact me. I used to work in insurance before I got into this game. And a lot of people haven't and still don't take out adequate pensions. And they think they'll be okay in their retirement. Or they don't adequately save for, rainy day or emergency funds, thinking that, sure, it'll all work out all right. Or another work examples are we overestimate the budget or even the duration of some projects that are going to happen. Sure, you only have to look at the Children's Hospital to see one that's very clear example of that. I'm a great fan of TED Talks, and I was watching one recently on optimism bias, and it was by a neuroscience professor at the University College London, Talia Sharat, I think is how you pronounce her name. And I'm just looking down because I want to read what she said, and it's a very good TED Talk if you want to follow up on this. It's about 17 minutes or so. But she says that with awareness and knowledge, we can strike a balance. So we can come up with plans and rules to protect ourselves from unrealistic optimism or optimism bias, and at the same time to remain hopeful about the future. So whatever you do to overcome the issue, being aware of it will definitely help you address it.
Thanks so much for that, Tom. That's really interesting stuff. I have to say, again, psychology is something that as you go on in business and you've been in big teams and seen people work together, the more you learn, the more you realise how human behaviour affects everything that we do. But for today, that's not what we're on. We're talking about behaviour change. And we're going to hand over to Donal, our ad man, and take a very different view. And hopefully Donal can give us his insights as to how advertising people approach this behaviour change subject, and hopefully that will help us with our own awareness campaigns. So over to you there, Donal.
Yeah, I'm the ad man. One thing that we do in every ad campaign, or we judge ourselves by, and it's on every brief to do, every advertisement, is there's three things that we need to do. We say, one, get their attention. If you don't get their attention, that's everything else is useless. You're wasting your time. Second thing we do is we ask them what it is we want them to do. Do we want them to buy our product? Do we want them to change their habit? Whatever it is, we have to make sure we tell them. And the third thing we have to do is give them a reason why they should do it. And something that's very often that's overlooked. And integral to this is knowing your target audience. So if we're selling a car, we're not selling it to 15-year-olds. We don't talk to 15-year-olds. Or if we're selling beer, it has to be, we're talking to somebody over the age of 18. If we're selling nappies, we're hopefully not talking to a 17-year-old. So knowing who you're talking to is really, really important. And I think this is a really important point when you're developing cyber awareness programs, that, cyber awareness programs are generally devised by technical people, the techies, and they're talking very often to non-techies. And so if you communicate stuff that's too difficult to understand, they switch off. So you've got to remember who you're talking to. When they're finished this presentation that you give on cyber security or cyber awareness, they're going to go back to their desk and they're kind of going to forget about it. Not forget about it, but they've too many other things to be thinking about rather than cybersecurity, which may be right up on your agenda. So it's just to be aware of that when you're developing your cybersecurity program. And it's something we'd see in advertising sometimes. There'll be a car manufacturer will want to explain, 20 great points about the car, but in reality, they've switched off after you've told them the second one and they take nothing out of it. So it's just something to be very aware of something like that. And it's something we encourage in advertising is single-minded proposition, it's called. Now, what a single-minded proposition is, the one single thing you want your consumer or your customer to take out of it. Just one thing, because they don't have a big attention span. We've all heard about this. The kids these days, they've forgotten everything in 5 minutes later. So give them one thing to remember, a much better chance of it being remembered in each communication. And the second thing we always do in advertising is frequency. So if we develop a TV commercial, we don't just show it once. Excuse me. We show it again and again and again to the point that you're pretty much sick of it. And when you're sick of it, we'll run a poster campaign using the exact same single-minded proposition, and then we'll run that again and again and again. And when that's run its course, we'll run another poster campaign, constantly reminding of them our whatever our single-minded proposition is. Now, I'm going to give an example of that. Would be a Bulmers campaign I worked on. It was a few years back, but our core theme was Bulmers, nothing added but time. It was a beer, it's like any other beer. It was cider. It was the only cider on the market at the time, but it wasn't selling well. And so we developed that line, and we talked about all the single-minded proposition was probably naturalness, and back to nature, and this is a natural drink. So, now we could have told them this is a bittersweet taste. It's lovely orangey colour. We could have talked about it makes you more attractive to women. We could have come up with all sorts of different things, and we could have piled them all into the ad, but we didn't do that because it becomes instantly forgettable when you cram the commercial really is one single proposition, nothing added but time. And we ran a television commercial, and we ran this poster, and then we ran this poster, and then we put down drip mats, and then we put signage in the pub. And when the customer walked into the pub, they walked up and ordered a pint of Bulmers, and they didn't know why they'd ordered a pint of Bulmers. But we get in under their skin, and it just becomes easy to buy that thing, buy whatever it is we're selling.
Thank you, Donal. It's always the stories around I always love the advertising stories and people getting involved and where they came from. But the impact, the example Donal used there of the Bulmers ad, it's the impact. Sales exploded for that product. It used to be quite low revenue. It was nearly being talked about being dropped. So it just does show, I think it's a great example of if you use the right techniques, you can definitely affect change. You can make things happen. So again, using their thinking and using their insights, I think is something that you should definitely think about and consider. And some of those little tricks, let's face it, that these guys have developed over the years, maybe not by studying psychology, I think just by gut feel, is a lot of what comes out of that. But I think one theme Donal mentioned there, I think very important, is that of repeating the message. Now, actually, again, the psychologist will tell you the same thing, that there's a lot of psychology behind that. So I'm just going to ask Tom, there's a lot of investigation. He's going to give a bit of an explanation from his behaviour change background, why repeating messages and repetition is so important. So if you don't mind, Tom, I'll hand back over to you if you can run through this for us today. Thanks.
So thanks, Tig. So firstly, it takes time to form new habits. Some of the latest research from 2009 by Philippe Lally in the University of London says that it takes 66 days to form a new habit. And for some of it, it takes even longer. So we need to have reminders or repetition of some of the information that we want to bring to our long-term memory whilst we're making this into a habit. And it's interesting to look at some of the research that I first was noticed by a German psychologist called, I'll get his name right, Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 1880s. And he noticed that our retention of information is quite poor, a lot poorer than what we might think it might be. So for example, after an hour of learning some new information, most of us only remember about 45% of that information. After a day, it goes down to 30%. And then as the weeks and months go on, it keeps going down. So if you look at the forgetting curve, as Ebbinghaus has called it, we see retention on one side of it and we see time on the other. Now, interestingly enough, on my leadership programs, I always get people to either remind themselves about the learning that's happened or I remind them of it. Because when we do that, the learning curve, or the forgetting curve as Ebbinghaus calls it, it won't be quite as sharp. So in other words, if you get reminders or summaries of information that you've learned, you know, be it an hour after the learning event, be it a day, be it a week, be it a month, be it 6 months, what you're actually doing there is bringing this information to your long-term memory, okay? A second thing, though, that's very important in behavioural change, and B.J. Fogg, who is an eminent behavioural scientist, would say that simplicity trumps motivation all the time. In other words, we're not as motivated to make changes as we might think we are. So if we make things simple, we're more likely to do the changes. So to summarise, the two main areas that I want to just summarise with you here are the importance of repetition and reminders, and also keeping things simple.
Thanks again, Tom, for that. I think, again, it's just sometimes when we know why and you get a backup or another way of looking at it, it just helps us shape our thinking in our designs. It certainly has helped me in understanding the psychology behind why we do things. It just makes it easier, I think, to build messages. But so thank you for that, Tom. But I'm going to finish off with the fourth point here. Just remember, we've talked about optimism bias. We've talked about our advertising campaign, and now we've talked about this repeat message. But I suppose a more traditional message is the one I'd like to finish on our fourth point is the power of face-to-face. I'm actually talking to people directly. Now, funny, over this medium I'm mentioning it because we're actually online here on a webinar where there's not a lot of interaction, but just the power of a face-to-face presentation. You're in a room, ideally with a number of people together, and what it means is that you can get an interaction going. And again, just going back to the theme, the single-minded proposition of our message today, if you like, is that it's about behaviour change and lasting behaviour change. So actually talking to somebody, letting an interaction happen in a room and letting something evolve, let questions be asked, interact with those questions, okay? And it also means that you don't have to write everything down. I think there's a very, very key message in delivering face-to-face presentations is using images. You can just use one image. I once went to a presentation where a guy used one image. It was actually a tsunami, a wave. That was it. And he talked for 25 minutes. And it was fascinating. Now, this was before lots of tsunamis happened around the globe, I'm afraid, but he explained the concept of it and how there was change coming in our industry, the tsunami of change. And it was great, just really, really worked and resonated with me. So I think in presentations, using images, like we do in our own awareness campaigns, we use images. Now, sometimes they're kind of funny images, simple things like that. But when we use them, we can then tell a story. And telling a story, amusing story ideally, again means people remember. And hopefully, if they enjoyed it or thought it was funny, they might repeat it to a friend. They might say it to somebody else. So again, just this idea face-to-face. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, call me that, but I believe it's the biggest impact that you'll ever make with somebody is actually to appeal to them directly, face-to-face, and see the reaction and answer their questions. So listen, I'm going to finish up now. Really enjoyed the session today. And I'm just going to repeat, because that's what we're supposed to do in these presentations, is repeat the 4 points, and you can write them now. You can write them down now, and that is, just remember, 1, understand optimism bias. Understand that we have a hurdle we need to get over, and how people react to our message is get to the why. Give them reasons why they should change, despite their not wanting to and believing it's a big issue. Number 2, use some of the tricks of the trade from the advertising industry when you put your campaigns together. Number 3, definitely look at repeat. And the last one is the power of face-to-face when you're building an awareness program. So just wanted to say thanks for attending. I hope you found something interesting and something to take away. But if you have any questions, please just send me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And thank you for listening.